Welcome, everybody, to Freelance Writing Direct. I'm your host, Estelle Erasmus, the author of Writing That Gets Noticed, Find Your Voice, Become a Better Storyteller, Get Published, which was named by poets and writers a best book for writers. Every week, I speak with novelists, with authors, with writers of every niche to talk about their tips, their tricks, their strategies, and how the sauce is made, including creative advice. I'll talk about essays and articles and share my own experience from 3 decades of publishing. So join me every week and grow your business and build your craft with Freelance Writing Direct. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. And follow along on Substack, where I share special clips for subscribers only at estelleserasmus.substack.com. Hi, it's Estelle Erasmus for Freelance Writing Direct, and I want to welcome Caroline Leavitt to the program. She is the New York Times best-selling author of 13 novels, most recently Days of Wonder, which was a CBS Mary Calvi book club pick, the recipient of a MidAtlantic Arts Foundation grant, and which was translated and has a shopping agreement for film. The co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, the book program, began the day of lockdown. She writes a column blog, Runs in the Family, for Psychology Today, and is a book critic for People and the recipient of a New York Foundation of the Arts Fellowship. She teaches story structure for the novel at UCLA Writers Program Extension and works with private clients. Her work has appeared in the New York Times Modern Love, New York Magazine, Salon, Lit Hub, The Millions, and many anthologies. Welcome to the program, Caroline. Caroline, can you just tell the audience a little bit about what your book is about?
Yeah, okay. So the book is actually about how people can change. And the book started when I was at lunch with a friend of mine just a recent friend. I've known her for a few years, and everybody loves her, and rightly so. And she leaned across the table to me and took my hand and said, "Caroline, I have to tell you something." And I thought, oh no, she's sick or something's really terrible. And she told me that when she was 15, she did indeed commit a murder, and she served time for it. She was in prison. And I, of course, was just gobsmacked. And she said, well, she committed this murder and she did it in the heat of passion. She was worried about a friend of hers who would commit suicide if she didn't do it. And when you're 15, you're just crazy. You're a car without brakes. And so she served time in prison, and it was a huge media storm because it was such a brutal crime. And she changed herself when she was in prison. She started to really think about who she wanted to be. She got her GED in prison. She got a degree in prison. She became a peer leader, and she became more spiritual. And because she was such a model prisoner and because she had been so young, they let her out after 6 years. And she thought, great, I have a new life, except that people wouldn't let her be. So she had to change her whole identity. She changed her name. She moved out of her country. She took on a new job, and she was a little bit reticent. And then when she was in her 40s, she was outed. And it was terrible. It was like the media came out again, and she just had to change everything again. And she had reached the point where she thought, when will people realize that I'm not who I was when I was 15 and I've atoned? So I, of course, wanted to talk to her about this, and I wanted to write about that idea. And I swore to her that I would never reveal her name because I don't want her to have any more misery, and that I would change the story as much as I could. And she said, fine. She gave her blessing. So I changed the story to 2 New York City kids. I changed the murder to an attempted murder. I made it a love story, sort of a Romeo and Juliet love story. And it basically follows the trajectory of this young girl who does or does not participate. She doesn't remember in an attempted murder of the boy's father, who's really brutal. And it's about what happens when she gets out of prison and how people see her because she's still a felon, even though she's free, and how she comes to terms with that. And that's what really interested me. There's also, a lot of this book was written shortly after my mom's death, and I really wanted to write about my mom's life growing up in an Orthodox Jewish home.
So this is so, and I hear this all the time that people are writing the novels, but based on things they've heard or learned about, or that was something close to them. And so that, really resonates. Number one, it resonates for you because you have a connection to the material. And number two, it kind of gives and you use this inciting incident where she's being let out of prison. And it's just such a great way to get into the novel because it's always good to start with something exciting that gets
Right,
your attention, that gets noticed. And for writers, we make choices every
right.
time we're doing. So, how did you make that decision to start with that? Like, that's the starting point.
Well, it took about, and I'm not exaggerating, about 16 revisions. The first opening I had was Ella, just this young girl in a prison, like hearing the sounds around her. And I really liked that opening, but nobody else did. And then it also meant I had to really go back into backstory, which I didn't want to do. I didn't have a dual timeline. Then I thought, well, maybe I'll start it where she's, in Ann Arbor and she's looking for a child. And then I thought, well, then that makes it seem like the novel is just about a mother and daughter, and it's about more than that. And I kept thinking, like, where do I start? What do I do? And it was just a process of trial and error. And I was trying to, it wasn't until I decided, okay, I'm going to do a dual timeline that I decided, okay, so there's two lives going ahead. There's the life once she gets out of prison, and it's the life before prison. So chapter one is when she gets out of prison, and chapter two is when I think it's chapter two, or if it's not, it's chapter three, is when she and Jude, the boy she loves, first meet before the crime. So you're following these two stories, but that took a really long time to figure out how to do it because I thought, well, I don't want to start. I have to tell the story of these two kids and how they fell in love so the reader feels it too. But if I start there, there's a whole lot of stuff you have to get to until you get to the murder, the attempted murder. So it was a lot of trial and error. And I would just tell writers, you have to make friends with not knowing at first and test driving things and seeing how it all works out.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you use these two moments in time. One
Right,
is 2008 when
right,
they were the kids and when the attempted perceived attempt happened.
right,
And then 2018, where she starts when she's getting out of jail. And then we go into 2019 as she's building or rebuilding her life. And there are just so many elements put together. So that's also craft, two timelines, working
yeah.
with two timelines. What is the thinking when you're thinking, okay, where does this piece go and where does that piece go?
It's a nightmare. But what you have to do, I mean, it's a joyful nightmare. What I had to do is I had to have like two separate files. And because I'm a visual learner, I did it all with Post-its put on the floor. And first I did like one whole timeline, which was what was going to happen with the kids. Well, first they meet, then they fall in love, and then this happens, and then that happens. Then they decide, that they want to get rid of the father. And then I had the other timeline, which is Ella gets out of prison and she can't take it and she thinks she has to have a job and blah, blah, blah. So I had all these two things together. And then I had to figure out, well, where do they go? How do they connect? And the thing I learned, which was actually a new thing for me after 13 books, was that when I ended like a piece in the present, like after Ella gets out of prison and she's thinking about stuff, I had to find an endpoint that would lead into the other time period. And sometimes it was something like Ella sitting on a bench watching two teenagers in love and just thinking she had had love like that. she didn't think she'd have it anymore. And then when you start chapter 2 and you timestamp it, so it's 2008, then you say the first time Ella met Jude, and then it sort of picks up on that thematic thing. So it was a whole lot of trial and error figuring out how much do I tell? How is it connecting to the past? How do I proceed with, the present day stuff without giving things away, because you want the time to be consecutive for both the past and the present. So it was really daunting. And I must have done 1,000 revisions on that to get it right. But I will say, once I got it right, it was thrilling. It was like, oh, I know how to do something new. This is great. This is great.
So let me break that down a little bit more. So you're taking almost like an object, right? Like a bench.
Mhm.
And you're saying, and it's almost like, the objective correlative. I don't know. I think Ann Hood might have come up with that, but she definitely uses a lot in her teaching, and she's been a guest on the program. And
I love that.
and yeah, she's wonderful. And where an object embodies the emotions.
Yes.
So if you're taking a bench, so the idea is you're saying, oh, I remember the last time. It's sort of like a window into moving into that other time zone. I love that as a kind of
Absolutely.
portal.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of times in the present where, you know, Ella will take a teacup and that will like move into the next chapter, which is a flashback of what they're doing the night of that this happened. It's always sort of, I began to learn that it's the present that triggers the past, that triggers the memory. Like I would have Jude as an adult, and he hasn't allowed himself to do any kind of gardening, which is what he loved. And he's working now in IT, and he's watering the plants of other people. And you just sort of end on that he's watering the plants of other people. Then I would switch to a chapter where Jude is in the garden because Helen, Ella's mother, has told him he can build a garden in her backyard. So you've got like the emotions that are sort of hooking together about an object. And that's how you sort of tightly knit everything together.
And I would also say that like gardening is nurturing, and
Yes.
Helen and Ellen, their relationship, and particularly Helen, Ella's mother, is very nurturing to Jude, and he's not getting much of that from his home.
That's right. Everything sort of hooks in together, and the trick is there's a lot of thinking involved. Thinking like, well, what's the connection? Like, how do you bridge off for that? Because you never want somebody to say, "Oh my God, this old stuff is boring. I want to go back to like see what Ella's doing," and you never want anybody to say, "Oh, I don't care what Ella's doing. I want to know about the murder." So I mean, there's a reason why I showed the murder 3 times from 3 different points of view, because I figured that's like the most interesting, exciting event. So I wanted to make sure that readers still saw it and had what they thought upended every time you resaw the murder.
I mean, Caroline, that's such craft. 3 different POVs for a murder. How did you come up with wanting to do that? And how do you structure the POVs? How do you make it work so well?
It was really hard because, first of all, I had to figure out what happened in the murder because I didn't know. I really didn't know when I first started it. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Was it one person? Was it another person? So I thought, okay, well, the first memory is going to be that the kids are just sleepless and they don't remember. So then the reader's going to keep reading on to find out, okay, now I know what happens. Then the second memory, I believe, is I don't even remember. It's either Ella's or Jude's memory, and they give us a little bit more of what happened. So then we think, oh, okay. And then the very last memory is the one that puts the pieces in place and tells you everything that you thought you knew is not true. And I love when I read that, and that was, as soon as I figured that out, then I wrote the 3 sections, the 3 point of views, and then I just had to figure out, well, when do we learn that? Like at what point do you put that in? Because the novel has a rhythm of like, when do you put in these reveals that change everything? And it was, again, I took out my Post-its and put them on the floor to try to figure out, well, maybe it'll work there. And I tried that out, and it didn't work. So I thought, okay, well, let me try it to put it later on. At one point, I had the last murder revelation at the very end of the novel, and I thought, that doesn't feel right. That doesn't feel right. That feels like we need another beat. So a lot of it is just gut feeling, and a lot of it is, figuring out how. A story's not this happened, this happened, this happened. A story, even with two dual points, has to be because this happened, this next thing had to happen. And when that next thing had to happen, then you get into, okay, if it had to happen in the present, how does that trigger a past memory? And you start looking at the past differently.
I love that. And
Sorry.
you end like on an, I'm not going to give the ending away, but you end on an action point that is sort of like a moment of redemption and transformation and, with an action. I thought, ooh, that's
Yeah.
clever. That's clever. And that's a choice too. So
That's a choice too, and that's a really hard choice because I don't really trust novels that end with everything tied up really neatly. I like to end with hope because I don't want people to, life is hard enough. But I also understand that hope is created by the characters, and there's always a feeling of, okay, so bad things might have happened, but you can move on and you can create happiness. And I couldn't figure out how to do it, and I knew I needed to. I always feel like the ending has to dovetail with something in the opening. And I don't want to give it away. It has to do with some action that Jude and Ella do to keep themselves together and know that they're a couple. And at the ending, at first, the action seems as though it's a negation of that, but actually it's not. Actually, it's an affirmation of something much stronger, which is of who Ella is going to be in the future if she can.
yeah, there's a lot of redemption. There's a lot of
Yeah,
transformation in every relationship, the mother-daughter
yeah,
relationship, the relationship between Jude and his new partner, the relationship between Ella and her partner, the relationship between how Ella thought of herself and needs
right.
to rethink of herself in a different way, and also what she can offer of value to society.
I'm glad you said that, value to society, because I always think in terms of Charles Manson, when he was alive, would never get out of prison. And part of the reason for that is because when asked, what would you do if you got out? He always said, I would kill again. I would do exactly the same thing. So there's like no change at all. You do not want someone like that. It just seems like there's no chance of redemption.
Right.
But if you look at the last Manson girl, Leslie Van Houten, she was 17 when the crimes were committed, and she was in a cult, and she was under his influence. She was on drugs. She served all this time. While she was in prison, like Ella, she got her degree. She became a peer leader. She became a psychologist. She just was an exemplary prisoner, and she was so wanting to redeem herself and knowing that what she did was terrible, terrible, terrible. And she kept being denied parole until a few years ago when she was in her 70s. But the thing was, what danger was she to society anymore? And in truth, the families of the victims did not want her in prison anymore either, because she had served her time. And she
That's
was let out. And as everybody knows, when she was let out, she did not go out and commit another murder. She did not go out and be in a cult. And I started thinking about, part of that is because we're very different people through time. She's not that 15, 17-year-old girl she was when she was in that Manson cult. She's a 70-year-old woman who has done a lot of hard work on herself and helped others. And that really interested me.
And in the case of Ella, she didn't serve that many years. She was still able to
Right.
go out and do different things in her life and also figure out the mystery of her life as well. So we've talked about like POVs and timelines and even like through lines in a certain way.
Right.
I'm just so fascinated by what your process is because you're so prolific, Caroline. I mean, you've written so many books, and I'm like, what is the secret?
There's no secret. There's no secret. It's just, I always ask other writers, well, did you feel like you learned something from writing this book that you could use to the next book? And they always say no. And it's true because every book is new and you just have to sort of learn to live with not knowing how to do it until you do it and figuring it out. I'm really big on structure because I feel like if you have that skeleton, then at least you can build on the skeleton. You can, dress it up or put more or less flesh on it, or it's just kind of a lot of hard work and figuring it out and also being willing to ask for help. I ask other writers I know for help all the time. I myself hire developmental editors to help me when I'm done with the draft. And a lot of writers do this and they don't want to say that they do because they feel like, well, I should know how to do it. And they're embarrassed. And I actually wrote a piece for Writers Digest about it. Well, you shouldn't be embarrassed because you can't see the forest for the trees. You're in it too deeply. You need somebody else to look at it and say, have you thought about doing it this way? And then the lights go on and you think, oh, that's a really good idea. It's a really good idea. I mean, I really encourage writers to, don't have a friend, don't have like someone who loves you, have somebody who knows structure and who knows what your intent is, look at your work and offer advice. It's just totally invaluable. It's totally invaluable and helpful.
I love that. So do you sit down and write and write and write and then figure out the structure, the POV, the through lines, or do you figure out the through lines and the stuff first, or do you have disparate elements all over the place?
That's a great question. It depends. What usually happens is I get a sort of an idea and an image, and I will start to write like a first page, and I will rewrite the first page over and over until I'm invested in it. Because then I think, well, I have this first page I love. I can't stop now. But once I have that first page, then I start doing about 6 months of structure work, where I will literally sit down and try to figure out what is it each character needs, what's their misconception about what they think they need, what's the character scar that's really haunting them that they need to heal in some way, what's their plan, how does the plan fail, how do they realize their misconception, and how are they going to change. And I try to work that up into what I call a writer's synopsis, which is usually like six to 30 pages. Oh, well, maybe this will happen, or maybe this will happen. And I do it for each character. Then I try to meld it into one 4-page synopsis of like, this might happen, and then this might happen, and this might happen. And then I just keep working on it for about 6 months. And then when I think, okay, I think I have a story here, then I show it to my writer friends. And then they all have something to say about it, which is, I don't understand this. Why would this person do that? Or what about this? Or yeah, I like this. Or no, I don't like that. And I listen and I think, okay, I'm going to go back and redo it. And usually it takes like another few months to get it to where I feel like, okay, I got the synopsis. And this is the point where a lot of writers say, well, there's no surprises for you then. So there's no surprises for the reader. And that's just not true because even though I have this synopsis, as you know, everything changes once you start writing because you make discoveries. My very first synopsis was the one that started with Ella in a prison listening to the sounds, and that had to totally be redone. And then there was the synopsis that started with the two kids and went through their relationship, and it was all chronological. And that had to be totally redone. And you just make discoveries as you write. So my first draft is what I call the discovery draft. I just sort of try to do it the best I can, and then I read it, and then I realize this is all wrong. This is totally all wrong. I mean, I just finished a novel 3 months ago, and I looked at it, and I knew something was wrong, and I realized that you know what? The opening I had made it seem like it was another mother-daughter drama. I thought, I don't want to do that again. So I had to rethink it. And then I realized the timeline. So then I rethought it. And then I realized, oh, the timeline is totally off because if I keep this timeline, then I have to write about 9/11 and, everything else. And I just didn't, and COVID, and I didn't want to do that. So I had to put it back into the 80s to write the novel, and that changed everything. But then the novel started to spark and come alive. But that took like a long time to get to that point. And now it's with my first of three developmental editors. So we'll see what they say. And then I'll move on from there. I mean, I feel like it's really a collaborative effort because sometimes you need people to help you realize the vision that you want. That you want.
Yes, that's brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant that you're sharing. It's sort of like a master class in writing, hearing, how you go about all the different dealing with
Yeah,
all the different disparate elements of writing. And it's not just what some people think, put your butt in the
right.
chair and write every day. Well, you could
Right.
be writing a diary and sure
Yeah, I used
day.
I used to do that, and I'd come out, where I would just write with the muse, and then I'd come up with 800-page novels, and I'd look at them and say, I don't know what this novel is about. I have no idea.
But you know what? You never gave up. You don't give up, and I
No,
feel like a lot of writers with their first disappointment, even disappointment in themselves, even looking at that
right.
garbage first draft that they I love that you call it a discovery draft. That
Yeah,
is very clever because again, it's that way of looking, that optimistic way of looking at it. It's not like this is my
right.
shitty first draft. It's like this is my discovery draft. That I'm using that, and I will cite you for it every time I
You don't have to do that, but it's true that you cannot absolutely give up. I mean, I've had a long career. But the first book I published, I had a major stroke of luck where I was discovered from a contest and my book blew up everywhere and I was the flavor of the month and I made a lot of money and I thought, oh, this is so great. I'm like in my 20s and I have money and it's always going to be this way. And no, it wasn't. I came down to earth very quickly. My publisher went out of business. I found another publisher. Book did not do well, went to another publisher. They wanted me to write this specific book, so I did, which you never should do. And it flopped as it should have. Found another publisher, and the books did okay, bounced around. My ninth novel, I had no sales until my ninth novels. And I want writers to understand that. Literally, nobody knew who I was. My ninth novel was part of a three-book deal at a big major publisher. It was the third book in the process. The editor called me up and said, Caroline, we're not publishing this. It's just not special enough for us. And I said, what? Can I make it more special? And they said, no, we don't think that you can. And I said, well, can I show you something else of mine? And they said, no, we don't. Best of luck in the future. So I knew, as most people think, that, well, if after nine novels and you have no sales and nobody knows who you are, nobody's going to want to publish you. Wrong, wrong, wrong. So I took time to cry and carry out. And my agent said, don't worry, you'll find someone. And I was crying to one of my writer friends, and she said, I'm at this house, Algonquin. I have a brand new editor, and she's really great. And I was talking to her about your book, and she wants to see it. And I said, yeah, right. And she said, no, 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 she does. So I sent her the book, and the editor called up, and she was talking about the book. And I said, look, I have to be honest. I don't sell books. I mean, I really don't sell books. I'm lucky if I sell like a few hundred copies. Nobody knows who I am. And she laughed and she said, you know what? That's going to change. So she bought the book. And 6 months before that book came out, it was in its sixth printing. The week it came out, it was on the New York Times bestseller list, and it stayed there for 3 weeks. And the original editor who had rejected the book called my agent and said, would Caroline like to come back? So the great thing about that is all of a sudden everybody knew who I was. And all of a sudden I was selling like so many books that when the royalty checks came, I thought this must be a mistake. They didn't, and I literally called them up and said, I think you made an accounting mistake. And they just laughed and said, no, 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 that money is yours. But the good thing about that is because I had those horrible years of, failure, I knew that not to count on this. Yes, it was a lovely, wonderful thing, but I knew that it was not going to happen again and again and again. So the next book I did for Algonquin did really well, got on the New York Times bestseller list again. Third book did a little less well. And because I knew that, things change. And when that third book for them came out, it was also the time of Trump's first inauguration, and nobody was doing much of anything. So I've learned that, the writers who make it are the writers who keep trying, who persevere. Do not give up. I don't care if you've had like 60 rejections. It doesn't mean that they are right and you are wrong. Keep going, keep applying. Even if you get there are so many books that got like 100 rejections from agents. Finally got an agent, did not, got another 100 rejections, finally had the book published, and all of a sudden everybody loves it. So just, head down, keep writing.
That's great advice, Caroline. And people need to keep true to themselves. And like I say in
Yes.
my book, it is not a sprint. Publishing is a
Right.
long game, and you
Yeah.
got to be in it to win it.
That's right. And don't write to the market. I know writers who say, like, well, romantasy is really big right now, and I'm going to do that. And I feel like, well, if that's a kind of book that you want to write, then that's great. Then do it. But if you're writing something different than that, why do that just for sales or money? Because, trends change. And if 5 years from now, maybe people won't be reading romantasy. And then what are you going to do? Write the book that matters to you, and it will matter to other people.
That's brilliant, because you have to be authentic to yourself,
Yes.
or
Yeah.
you will never be authentic to readers.
That's right. That's right. That's a good quote.
So, okay, you said you're writing another novel. You're probably done with it. So is that what's next for you?
Well, the novel that I just finished that I put back into the 80s is now with a developmental editor. And after that, it goes to my agent, and then we'll see what happens with that. And in the meantime, while I'm waiting, I've started another novel. And so far, all I have on that so far is I have a good first chapter. So that's important to me, because that means I can't stop when it gets rough, because I have this good first chapter and I have the synopsis on that. And I haven't been able to write much now, but I will get back to it. I will get back to it.
Thank you so much. I mean, Caroline, this was brilliant, and you are absolutely going to have to come back with your next
Thank you.
on the program. Oh, I love speaking with you, and you're also part of the episode that's now out on being Jewish now.
Yes, I am. I'm very proud of that book, and being very proud of being part of that.
Yes, and it's your essay in there is just so evocative and really
Thank you.
shows the importance of feeling your culture and how you can express it. And we are a country where people can express their religion,
That's right. That's
anything
right.
about themselves. And so that is so important. And I'm so proud to be able to share that episode with my listeners and viewers.
Thank you for sharing it. And I love talking with you. It's so much fun.
It is so much fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you so, so much. And thanks to all your listeners too. I really, really appreciate it.
Follow me at estelleserasmus.com on my website, and on social media, which is Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter, at Estelle S. Erasmus. And we're now on YouTube for Freelance Writing Direct. Follow along, and soon everyone will be reading what you're writing.